Well, the world is passing me by. This digital age, these smartphones and all these apps and all these things that are going on. People my age and those that are older, you remember the time when we had phones that were actually in a house that were connected to a line, right? And when people called and you weren't there, you didn't get anybody. Oh well, right? You had to try again, right? When I was growing up in this little town, we had our phone in the house, but my best friend, Brian, he lived on a farm just about maybe 2 miles out of town, and he had to share a phone line with the farm just a quarter mile south of him. Have you ever heard party lines before? Yeah. They had to share that line. And so they had a ring. I think they had I forget now what it was, 2 rings, and the other farm had 3 rings. I forget what it was. And so if you heard 3 rings, you didn't answer the phone unless you were bored. Now, if his dad was not around and we were bored, we would answer the phone very quietly because we knew who was on the other line. It was Karen. She was one of our classmates. We had a small class. We knew it was her because she was always on the phone. And she was always talking to one of our other classmates and always talking about boys and gossiping about whatever. And Brian and I would be listening. And sometimes we just couldn't hold it. We would just start giggling. And she would hear us. Get off the phone! Can a person have any privacy around here? Well, she knew the answer to that. No. There was no privacy in that small community. We really did, privacy was a prized commodity. Whatever little privacy we had, we cherished because there were some people in particular that made it their business to know everybody else's business. And so we didn't give them any extra ammunition, against us, because, we had a reputation. We had to try to at least keep some reputation. There was, this no privacy. And I was thinking about that with today's gospel. Obviously Jesus didn't have any phones back in his day. But in his rural environment, in the small town, there was no privacy, very little. And so they cherished what little they had. And the way that they compensated that was by way of their reputation. They upheld honor at every expense. And at the other side, they avoided shame at all cost. And so here, honor basically was a public claim of worth. But in order to have honor, you had to have the other side publicly acknowledge your claim of worth. So it was a two-way street. You had to publicly claim your honor, but then you had to have others publicly acknowledge that. And so people understood that. And so Jesus gives this parable. Now, the one son publicly acknowledges his father's honor. Now, the fact that he doesn't follow through on what his father wanted him to do is secondary. What he did is he honored his father publicly. The other son, he doesn't. What he does is he publicly shames his father. And the fact that later on he's sorry for that and that he actually does what his father wants is beside the point. The damage was already done. Nobody's going to check up on them to see that they actually did what their father wanted them to do. And so the question that Jesus asks is really what's important here. Jesus doesn't ask which of the two sons did the honorable thing. Jesus asks which of the two sons did the will of the Father. Which of the two sons did the will of the Father? You see, because Jesus' own honor was being challenged publicly. We don't hear it in the gospel, but right before this, the elders, the chief priests, they're publicly challenging Jesus in the temple. Jesus is teaching in the temple area. And these authorities are miffed. Now, I'm paraphrasing this, but they come up to Jesus and they're saying, "Look, what are you doing here? This is our turf. You have no place here. You have no authority here. We didn't give you permission. You have no credentials. By what authority are you doing this?" They're challenging his authority publicly. And the answer that Jesus gives is essential. It's central to what Jesus says, to the gospel today. He says, "My worth, my authority, my value has little or nothing to do with what you think or what you see. My worth, my value, my authority has everything to do with what God thinks and what God sees." And my friends, isn't that true ultimately for all of us, especially in the spiritual life? Yes, it's important to a certain extent, to a certain degree, what others think and see of us, our reputation, our own honor, yes. But there's a higher purpose for the things that we do, a higher authority. My friends, there's a higher motivation for the things that we do, especially in the spiritual life, that there's a sincerity of heart for what God sees and what God thinks for what we do, for why we are here in this church, that we're ultimately doing it for the praise and glory of God. You know, I read a story just yesterday, true story, happened somewhere around Evansville, Indiana. Two nuns saw a man cutting his lawn. Apparently he had a large piece of property and he had a riding lawnmower that looked like one of these miniature tractors. And so the nuns had a conversation with the man, and one of the nuns said, "You know, I've always wanted to ride a tractor." And so the man said, well, sure, sister, of course. Here, you can ride my riding lawnmower. So he set it up for her, put it on the lowest speed, got her on there and set her off, and there she went. And he was standing there with the other nun, and he was talking with her, and he said, "You know, it's just like driving a car." But the other nun said, "Well, sister's never driven a car before. Her eyesight's too poor." And so he looks up, and sure enough, there she's driving towards a fire hydrant. So he starts running after her, and he says, turn it! And the other sister says, "She can't hear either." Poor nun. Can't hear, can't see. But you know what? God hears. God sees. God knows. What is the motivation for the things that we do ultimately? Publicly? Privately? I pray that, especially in the spiritual life, that the ultimate reason that the things that we do, that why we're here today, that we do it because for the praise and glory of God, that everything that we do, everything that we say, that we want to do it because we want to please God, that it's holy and pleasing in God's sight. Because ultimately, my friends, that's the only acknowledgement that really matters. Amen? Amen. God bless you.